Today we want to show you how to take a brand new piece of furniture and add 250 years of aging to that, replicating the authentic markings of a true antique. The end grain split is the result of loss of moisture, where the two boards actually separate and one becomes lower than the other one. And you'll see that also referred to as planking. Here are the materials you will need to complete this project. Let me point out to you the planking technique, the seasoned splits, and the open joints that we've created on this piece of wood. We're going to start with this piece of wood, which we've already pre-treated with the natural wood stain, and that again is to keep the end grain from going dark. We'll show that on a separate panel. So what we want to do first is determine exactly where we want that joint to open. The one thing to consider with an authentic antique is you wouldn't open every joint. So we'll start with a select joint. You can use a straight edge if you choose. Make an incision. The next thing is to wiggle the knife, and that's what creates that natural tear effect. When the wood splits and opens up, it typically wants to splinter. So by sticking the knife into the split, you can create just a small chip out. The next thing would be the planking. Let's consider that I want to create a planking in the center panel. I start again by making the incision, tapering it away, going back and following that same marking, jiggling the knife, and that gives me a foundation to create a planking effect. Then using a chisel, I start on one side of the board, insert into the incision, and then in the direction of the grain and in the direction of the incision, simply twist the chisel back and forth. And what that does is give the impression of a piece of wood, because of the loss of moisture content, is actually shifted. It creates a planking effect. So I also want to demonstrate a end grain split. The end grain split would always start at a joint, and it would always start out as very blunt. And from that blunt edge, we want to taper away. So if you always think about an airplane that starts on the runway and takes off, you want the end of the joint, or the end of that mark, to go away. Just like that. And again, insert the blade into the incision and just make a couple chip outs. That adds to the authenticity. Now, the difference between an end grain split, which has a blunt end and then tapers away, a seasoned split, which is something that happens in nature, is something that can happen anywhere on the board. It can happen in the center of the board. The difference is it tapers on both ends. So again, you would imagine an airplane that would come into the runway and then back off. So we do that simply by moving the knife, making the incision, jiggling the knife, and then taking off. Sometimes two together looks really creative. One thing that you always want to remember is no matter what the physical distressing technique is that you use, the stain, the finish will always magnify by 8 to 10 times. So always consider that. With any distressing markings that we make, we want to finish up by gently sanding over the surface in the direction of the grain, just to remove any nibs and splinters. The one thing that we don't want to take away is the detail of the physical aging. We want to be able to continue to see that. We just want to soften it, soften the edges. And now it's ready for finishing. Now we're ready to apply the wood stain. We'll apply the stain, a good even wet coat overall. We want to make sure that the stain penetrates into all the crevices. This can be applied with a brush, with a lint-free cloth, either one or both. Make sure that we get all the moldings, the edges, a good even wet coat so we allow for maximum penetration of the stain. I also like to use a small, inexpensive brush just to make sure that I have stain in all the corners, all the crevices, which is a little more difficult to get to when you're using just a cloth. Now we want to allow this to fully penetrate into the wood, so we want to give it a couple minutes to do that. We've given the stain a couple minutes to penetrate, and now we'll begin to wipe. Again, I like to wipe across the grain in a circular motion, and then finish up by wiping in the direction of the grain. We want to make sure that we wipe off all the fingerprints, again wiping in the direction of the grain. Now you can see how the physical distressing marks are accentuated. They're showing up as much as 10 times what it was in the white wood. Here we have the planking, the end grain split, the chip outs, the season splits, and all of that just shows itself beautifully, just like an antique.